Awesome. Well, hello and welcome, folks. My name is Celeste Harrison. I'm here from National Geographic Education, and I'm so excited to welcome you to today's Explorer Classroom session. This month on Explorer Classroom, we're focusing on storytelling and photography. We're talking to National Geographic storytellers and photographers and going behind the scenes for a sneak peek at all the work that goes into telling or showing a great story. Today, we're connecting with National Geographic filmmakers who recently returned from the 2019 National Geographic and Rolex expedition to Mount Everest as a part of our Perpetual Planet partnership. This expedition was to a very, very extreme place, Mount Everest. Everest is the tallest mountain in the world. It stands 8,848 meters above sea level. Correct me if I'm wrong, guys. And we're so excited to hear from filmmakers Sam and Tyler and surprise guest Martin Edstrom about the unique challenges and opportunities that they had while capturing stories in one of the world's absolute harshest environments. Today, joining us on screen, we have Mr. Piercy's class, Mrs. Newman's class, Miss Sue's pre-K, Miss Irvin and her budding scientists, Mrs. North's STEM class, Mrs. Williams' class, Miss Abdo's fourth graders, Miss Myler's class, Mr. Ghaffari's class, Mrs. Armstrong McLean's class, Mrs. Brotman's class, Mrs. Turnch's class, Miss B's third grade, Miss Brown's fifth grade, Bluff Park Elementary School, Mrs. Gill's Advanced World Geography, a bilingual homeschool group, in the U.S. Virgin Islands, the Ad Astra Academy, Mrs. Noglish grade 4s, Miss O'Gorman's class, Team Inspire, and Mrs. Galetta's class. We're so excited to have all of you here with us today. For any other YouTube viewers, go ahead and drop us a chat in the bar to the side of the video. Introduce yourself, say hi, we'll give you a shout out. And if you come up with any questions as we go, feel free to ask them in that same chat bar. I'll ask them on your behalf in a little bit. But first, let's hear from the main event, the storytelling team from Everest. I think I've talked plenty. I want to turn it over to you guys to teach us something.
Awesome. Well, great to be in touch, everybody. This is really cool.
Yeah, thank you all so much for being here. It's really an honor to get to talk to all of you today. We're psyched.
Yeah, definitely. Should we share the screen now, or?
Yep. All right. So we're gonna start off with maybe about a 15-minute presentation that includes a short video at the end. We're gonna go through a few of the photos that we took and that friends of ours who are also on the team with us took. And let's see if I can actually get it started here.
Are we sharing right now?
I believe in
share screen. Here we go. Let's share. And then let's
now you can see it, right?
Present.
It looks great, guys.
Nice.
Awesome.
Awesome. Cool. Well, let's start to kick it off here. So I'm sure most people are pretty familiar with Everest. It's the tallest mountain in the world, as Celeste mentioned. This particular project was sort of unique in that it was one of the largest scientific expeditions to Everest. And so we were part of the media team, or helped lead the media team that was following up to 10 groups of scientists on the mountain who are studying climate change up in the Himalaya. So Everest is in Nepal, which is part of the Himalayan mountain belt in Asia.
And real quick, I just want to point out on this first image, so the Himalayas are a big mountain range. And so there are lots of really tall mountains all around Everest. And so in this first image, Everest is actually the one kind of on the left, poking up behind the other mountain. That's the actual summit of Everest, but there are lots of really tall mountains all around it also.
Yeah, so it's the darker one up to the left, and so you're sort of getting a glimpse at where base camp is at the bottom left, and from most of your perspective in Nepal and through the valley that leads up to where Everest lies, you actually can't see the mountain. So this is sort of a unique view that you can actually see the mountain from a lower elevation. We wanted to kind of kick this off with some quick facts for those that may not be as familiar, but essentially anyone who is going to attempt to climb Mount Everest has to start lower in the valley in Nepal. So it takes about 10 days to trek by foot just to get to Everest Base Camp. And then from Everest Base Camp, most people will stay there for a few weeks because you have to acclimate to the high elevations before proceeding and going even higher. And so most expeditions and most climbers will stay at base camp for a few weeks. Our expedition was there for about 6 weeks, and the highest that our team got to was about a little over 27,000 feet.
You can imagine when so many people, I mean, our expedition alone was over 40 people to do the science expedition, but there are expeditions coming in from all over the world to climb this mountain. So base camp basically grows into kind of a city at this time. There's thousands of tents everywhere you look. You wake up, you step out of your tent, there's thousands of people living there at the foot of the mountain.
Yeah, and it was over 1,000 people living there when we were there, like almost 1,500 people, I think.
Yeah, and we can show you in an image that's coming up here shortly. But essentially, base camp lies on the glacier itself, and it's about a mile long. So calling it a little city is pretty accurate. So what we want to do with this presentation is sort of walk you through the journey and kind of give you the storytelling perspective. And so we're going to kind of start with the trek, and we're going to kind of cover some of the science that we documented on this journey, and then we'll take you all the way to as high as our scientists, Sherpa, and other climbers got to. So in order to begin your journey to Everest Base Camp, like I said, you start on a 10-day trek. And that trek requires you to fly into a village or a town by the name of Lukla. This is an image of Lukla Airport, which is, they say, the second most dangerous airport in the world. I think it could be the first. Essentially, this is the only way to get up to the point to start your trek. So you either have to helicopter in or you fly in. Our team was fortunate enough to helicopter in. It's the safest way. You can see the runway strip here. It comes in at a slant.
It's on an angle like this.
Yeah. Not only is it on an angle, but what you can't see at the bottom is a cliff. So airplanes that are coming in to land have to get past the edge of the cliff and land going up. And so when they take off going down. And that's essentially because it's such a short strip. They need to land going up so they can stop, and they need to be able to go down so they can catch enough speed to take off. And when you're trekking through the valley, this is essentially, this whole valley leads up to where Everest is. And it's all trekking by foot, and it requires going past, I think, 7 to 10 suspension bridges. So this is kind of like the bridge of, I might be dating myself here, but the bridges that you see like in Indiana Jones movies, they're very long. They're very, how would you describe? They're very rocky.
Yeah, they definitely kind of sway back and forth, especially on a wind.
On a windy day, there's also these big yaks. You'll probably see them in some of our other pictures. These big cow or buffalo relatives and when they come with tons of baggage and luggage from all the people, they walk over this bridge, and there's even a hint of wind. They start swinging like this, and you gotta be careful.
Kind of hang on for your life there.
Yeah.
But yeah, and that brings up a good point too. Just real quick, the trekking by foot is not just the foreigners coming in to climb, but to set up the expedition, all of the local people that we work with, everything needs to be carried up by foot. In most cases. So people are carrying heavy loads for 10 days to build camps at base camp. What's great about this photo is that it's, as you can probably tell, it's an aerial, it's taken from the sky. So it was used with one of our drone cameras. Our media team was quite big, but we had more equipment than we did people. We actually had 13 drones, and I think, so for the actual filming cameras, for still photography and for video, I think we had probably 15 to 20 across the whole expedition. So a lot of equipment to bring out.
A lot of equipment, yeah. And this is the yaks that we were just mentioning.
Yep. So this is a quick snap of the yak that Martin had mentioned. You can see them carrying loads. Kind of a cool cultural photo too on the sort of the back middle left, you see some of the religious artifacts that are all along the trek. Buddhism mostly, Buddhist. This is the village of Fortse. It's sort of a good depiction of a typical village that you see on your trek up to base camp in Nepal. And you can probably see little yellow people there in the center left. That's a group of our weather scientists that were on the expedition studying climate change. And this was a sort of a test site. They set up a weather station as a test site. They ended up setting up, how many weather stations in total? 1, 2, 3, 5, 6? Five or six, from this point, which is about 12,000 feet, this village, and then all the way up to 27,000 feet. So this was the kind of the patient zero weather station.
Yeah. And we all got cool matching yellow jackets, so you could always see us from far away.
And so this is also still in the village of Fortse. This is actually our geography team, our team that was doing mapping on the expedition. And you can see a drone in flight there. The drones that we had on the expedition weren't just used for storytelling, wasn't just for beautiful imagery. Our scientists were using them too to do terrain mapping and different types of very technical stuff that's well beyond my my expertise. But here they're doing some test flights before they get to base camp, where they did most of their mapping. So they're doing a lot of mapping work with drones, 3D mapping. And this is still in the village of Fortse. So our entire Sherpa team, and we can talk about what the Sherpas do later, but our Sherpa team is from this one village in Fortse. They're basically our local people that help with everything on the expedition. Nothing can happen without them. And this is a quick shot of a puja ceremony. It's a religious ceremony in Nepal, basically to get monks to bless just about anything. They were praying and blessing our expedition, but they could be blessing anything that you are about to embark on.
Yeah. So for the Sherpa communities, it was a really important thing that they go through this puja ceremony.
Yeah, and I think we had 3 or 4 puja ceremonies in total over the course of 2 months.
But this is also, there's also bad sides to this place, as you can imagine, with all these people coming, with the massive pressure on this place, because there's so many people who come to want to climb Mount Everest, but there's also, maybe there's a few hundred climbers per year. I think last year there were about 390 climbers or something like that. But every year there's also thousands and thousands of tourists. So I think last year it was almost up to 60,000 people who came throughout all of the year into this small national park. And you can imagine the pressure of that people. And that's what you can see in this photo, because these horses here are unfortunately actually eating trash and eating plastic. What you see there in the background is Mount Everest. And this is one of many places where there's just too much pressure on this region that used to be just tiny villages along a trail. Now you have thousands and tens upon thousands of people passing through, and there are bad sides too.
Yeah, so it's kind of a contrast to see the beauty of this region and then also the pressure from the people who visit it.
Yeah.
And then continuing our trek, getting much closer to base camp now, it started to get a lot snowier, a lot colder. You had to be really careful with your footing. And here, this is a photo of our climbing lead, Pete Athens, up in front. And then down near the bottom is me and then Tyler in this photo.
Yeah, and I guess one quick note, because obviously we have a terrain change here. Essentially, when you begin your trek, you're at about 8,000 feet, I think.
9,000.
Yeah. So you fly into where that airport is in Lukla, you fly into about 9,000 feet, and then you trek up to about 17,500, which is what base camp is at.
But you do that over the course of 10 days so that you're letting yourself really acclimate and get used to being at those high altitudes, because if you were to go up too fast, you would get really, really sick. And this is one of the leads of our science team in the front here. And this was the day before we were getting to base camp, and there was a bit of a snowstorm, and he was starting to get sick here, just with like the flu, basically, which is another challenge of being in this area for sure. But like the other guys were talking about, one of the really important essential parts of a trip like this is having people and having yaks to help carry all of your equipment, because we're working with these scientists that have really heavy scientific gear, and then we have heavy cameras and all the batteries for our cameras and everything. And so we worked with just absolutely essential porter team that was helping carry our stuff from these different villages as we were getting up to base camp. So this was one of our porters carrying a couple of these really heavy bags, and we just can't thank them enough for their role. And this photo is a little hard to make out maybe, but this is actually the top of the Khumbu Glacier that kind of goes through the middle of the image. And then the peak up in the top right corner poking out is the top of Mount Everest. So that darker peak up there is the highest point in the world. And then down kind of in the bottom left of this image is all of base camp. So this is taken from above and really far away, but it lets you see how base camp is actually on this glacier. And so we're living on a glacier for 6 weeks, which was a pretty wild experience. And then this is just a little map graphic that kind of gives you a similar view, but it shows base camp down in the bottom left, and then it shows where we are actually setting up the weather stations on the way up the climbing route up towards the summit of Mount Everest. And this is what our climbing team and our weather station team were working on. And you can see sort of where the glacier goes. It makes this big bend around through kind of the bottom part of this map image here. And so we lived in base camp for 6 weeks, and during that time there was a lot going on, but one of the things that happened pretty often was avalanches would fall off of the steep sides of these mountains that are all around base camp. And so this was an image that we got from our camp of one of the bigger avalanches, where this big chunk of ice broke off from kind of the top right there. And this one, actually, the sort of spray of ice and snow did actually like come and cover our camp. But most of them, you just kind of hear them or see them far away, and the avalanches really aren't a danger. But it's definitely a little bit nerve-wracking sometimes if you hear a big avalanche.
You have to mention just a few years ago, 2 years in a row, Nepal was devastated by earthquakes and avalanches.
Yep.
That really did hit base camp. So
Absolutely.
It is a very dangerous place. And if you're unlucky to be there one of those years and there's an earthquake, it's very bad.
Yeah.
And it's probably worth mentioning, and Sam will probably get into this too, but you stay in tents. The base camp is a tent city, and so each person has an individual tent that they sleep in. And so when you're sleeping at night, almost every night you do hear avalanches happening. And because base camp is surrounded, literally, I would say 200 degrees. I mean, it's surrounded by mountains, and so you actually can't tell where the avalanche is coming from. It's pitch black, and you're just sitting in your tent, and you're like, oh, I wonder if that one is coming from the left. I wonder if it's going to hit base camp. You don't know.
You're just hoping it gets quieter instead of getting louder and louder, and then that would be the issue. But I know we're running a little long on time here, so this was sort of our setup. The tent down in the bottom right was where we ate all of our meals. The green tent in the middle was our kitchen tent, where we had some great cooks preparing meals for us. And then behind that, some of those dome tents were our media tents, where we were storing our camera equipment and where we were taking our footage that we would shoot during the day and copy it at night onto hard drives and everything. So that was sort of the layout of our camp there.
Yeah. So I'm going to go through this quick, because I know we're losing time here, but this is just another shot of our someone from our mapping team doing some drone work, basically scanning all of base camp. And so what I want to quickly note here is that, like I said, this was a very large scientific expedition studying climate change. We had mapping teams. We had a weather team studying climate and weather. We had a glaciology team who was studying the ice and snow change. Biologists studying the different species up there, some that hadn't been documented before, and geologists studying the terrain as well. So essentially, as filmmakers and as photographers, it doesn't matter what the project is. Our job is always to be 2 steps ahead, so that we can anticipate and know what to cover on these projects. But this was a very challenging project, not just because of the extreme environment and location, but because we had 40 scientists, and basically not just at base camp. It's they're spread out all over the place. You have to travel to get to some of these scientific sites. You had to take helicopters, you had to walk and trek, and so 2 months sounds like a long time for an expedition, but every day we're working to try and capture the essence of everything. And we can go through these photos quickly, but this is a really cool shot of our science and media and climbing team as they start to trek or climb past base camp. That's base camp in the back there. As they journey to the next camp, Camp 2, before they set up weather stations up near the summit. And so you basically begin your journey from base camp to your next campsite through the Khumbu Icefall, which is essentially a part of the Khumbu Glacier that is on the mountainside and constantly falling down. And so it has a lot of crevasses. It's all ice, and it's basically their path. The Sherpa come in ahead of time, and they set up a trekking path made of ladders that you have to pass over these crevasses. And essentially they're ladders that you get from a hardware store. There's nothing special about them. You have to kind of learn how to walk across them because you have all this equipment on and you have special gear and boots. And I might let Martin talk about this one. This is another pressure picture.
As you've probably seen in the media, and as we were talking about, there's a lot of people here, and there's a lot of congestion even on the mountain. Just like, when you get traffic jams on a road, that kind of happens on Everest as well. There's more people than ever who want to climb it. And I think the main difficulty of this expedition, doing actual science on the mountain this year, was just all the people trying to get to the top. And our expedition was doing this for scientific purpose, but many people are just here climbing. Everyone has the right to do it, but there was a bit many people on the mountains that at the very least.
Yeah.
So I think we'll just skip through here because I know we're short on time. Let's get some of the photos of the high stuff.
So we can just quickly go through these real quick. This was one of the high altitude science things that they were doing, and I'm going to go back real quick just to show these again, was to take this drill and drill down into the glacier. And if you see behind the person who's sort of squatting down on the ground, that's the summit of Everest back behind them. And so this was up at a place called the South Col. And this was the highest ice core that's ever been taken. And basically what this chunk of ice that they're putting in a tube here, what this does is it shows us what the air was like way back in history. And they can analyze it using lasers to sort of see how the climate has changed, to see if there were any big like volcanic eruptions or anything like that way back in the atmospheric record.
And so it could go back as far as a few thousand years, up to 10,000 potentially, but at least a few thousand.
And so they were able to get 10 meters, so more than 30 feet of this ice core just in those short chunks, like you saw, chunks about that big. They got more than 30 feet worth of those chunks that you see collected here in these tubes. And then this is a cool photo because this was the highest weather station in the world at the time when they built it. But then they continued even higher up. And so this is also the summit of Everest, up to the top left. And they continued on up to one of the ridges that you see kind of most of the way up towards the summit. And then up there, they were working starting when it was still dark out,
3 a.m., yeah.
and then continued working as the sun came out to build the highest weather station that's ever been built in the world. And this weather station is still transmitting data, and you can actually check it out. There's a live Twitter feed at EverWeather. It's ever_weather, that can show you the data that's coming directly from this weather station. And so it has temperature, pressure, wind speed, and you can actually look at all of that in real time. And it gets pretty cold and windy up there, so it's a pretty cool thing to be able to check out. And then we love this photo because it kind of looks like, you know, photos you might be used to seeing from the actual summit of Everest. And I think it's just a great photo to kind of wrap up and talk about how this wasn't, you know, the point of this expedition wasn't to get to the very top of Everest. It was to get as close to the top as made sense to put up this weather station. And so the team built this weather station. It's still working many months later now. And they decided actually not to continue on up to the very top of the mountain because this was their goal, and they achieved it here. So I love this photo that shows our high altitude team here. And then the last thing we want to do real quick is show about a 2-minute video.
And here, this is actually what me and my team filmed, a virtual reality film. You will now be seeing this on a screen, but if you ever come to National Geographic, or if your classrooms will be able to get one of our headsets, this is what you could actually watch inside a virtual reality headset that you put on your head. So it feels like you're actually there. And pay close attention, because one of these top climbers who's been on Everest 7 times, on the top of Everest 7 times, Pete Athens, he's actually the voice you're going to hear now.
So it's really quite a daunting task for our team, but we're up for it.
So this is that highest weather station. And then that's up towards the summit. That's the summit right up top.
What we're supposed to be doing here is not simply a climb to the mountain, because the summit will allow us to bring back some information that will be pertinent to everybody on Earth.
Base camp.
Yeah. And this is a time lapse. That's why people seem like they're running around, but it's actually a time lapse that has a very long time in base camp to show how all the activity, and like people are like ants running around and all their business.
And then this was to practice walking on those ladders like we talked about earlier. This was
We have a great team of Sherpa. We have a great team of scientists.
This was right near
we're
base
pretty
camp.
in the face of a mountain that's
And this is
so
Tyler
enormous
poking out
and
in the
obviously
background here.
doesn't always tolerate humanity so well.
As you can see, everyone's freezing. Everything up here is so
With the
incredibly
winds in
hard.
excess of 50 miles an hour, maybe gusting even harder, snow in your face all the time, trying to breathe thin air and do some complicated assembly. We have the team here to achieve and succeed at all those types of scientific objectives, but also to be able to tell the story.
And that was them
The
getting
story that we
that
can
ice
bring
core.
back will be incredibly compelling. And I think trying to bring back more data, more information, and then to try to assemble it. What's going to be our 10-year plan? What's our 20-year plan? Where do we need to be protecting these places?
And this shows base camp and the mountain back behind.
And hopefully all of you can hear the voice as well. And if you didn't, this is going to be online sometime later this spring. Yeah, that's it, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Let's open this up for questions.
That's amazing, guys. What cool storytelling, both in the science, telling the story of the whole planet, and in your images, all that determination and honestly discomfort on people's faces, but also those triumphant images. I don't think I've ever seen science look so glamorous or so adventurous. You guys are really taking us there. Thank you. So now let's get some questions. We've got a lot of great groups with us up on screen, but they're not the only ones who can ask questions. Send us your questions in the chat bar if you're watching online, and I'll ask them on your behalf. Let's take our first question from Bluff Park. I'm going to turn on your microphone now.
Sit down low. Real loud. Go, baby, go. Real loud.
My name is Amina, and I'm asking, what got you interested in climbing?
Oh, yeah.
Good question.
Climbing is a fantastic sport. It truly is. All of us climb, and it's this. Once you tried it, at least when I tried it the first time, being out in nature, being able to climb something and get to the top is, of course, always fulfilling. It's an amazing feeling to get on the top of a mountain. But even that part, even the journey, the struggle to learn all these steps, to be able to do something safely, to put your foot in front of the other, to learn how to work with ropes and with teams and with the people you care about to get to that summit. That whole journey of climbing is just really, really fantastic.
Yeah, and I'll just add that climbing in a gym, even if it's just inside climbing at a climbing gym, is really fun, and it's a great way to stay in shape. So I go to the climbing gym probably 2 or sometimes 3 times a week. It's just a really fun way to kind of stay active.
Yeah.
Awesome. Our next question comes to us from our chat bar. Have you guys had any tragedies while climbing? I'm hoping the answer is no.
Yeah, fortunately on our expedition there was no tragedy, but a lot of us got sick. I got super sick. We came home with coughs. We came home with stomach disorders. We had lots of people in the team flying down, getting evacuated in helicopters, including me, because there's a lot of things that can go wrong at this altitude. And when you get sick, it's extremely hard to recover.
Yeah, the body functions differently up there. And so if you do get sick, and it's common to get like a flu-like virus, even if it's not the flu, you often have to go down to lower elevations, sometimes like in our case, all the way back down to Kathmandu, the biggest city in Nepal, to heal. And it took Sam and I a week to heal, but Martin got sick a couple of times.
Yeah.
And
I was gone
most of the
He was sick
Yeah.
the whole time.
Exactly.
So
But also on this tragedy side, we have to say, fortunately enough, our expedition didn't have an actual tragedy, but several people died this year on Mount Everest. They were not on our expedition, but there are a lot of people, usually every year, who die while trying to climb it.
Yeah, and our Sherpa team actually saved somebody's life who probably would have lost their life up there, and he was disoriented and starting to get really, really cold, and they were climbing, and they actually managed to help evacuate him down and saved his life from another team. So that was, it's pretty serious up there, and it's pretty scary to hear about some of the stories.
Such an unforgiving environment for sure. Wow, big tragedies. On the smaller tragedy front, did you guys lose any gear while you were up there?
yes.
We may or may not have crashed 2 drones. We luckily none of us were actually flying it, but we crashed one pretty expensive drone into the side of a mountain, and then rushed a lot. Really worked hard to get a replacement drone so that we would have it, because it was kind of the more expensive, the bigger, the nicer one that makes really, really nice video and images. And so we really wanted to have that as an option up there.
Because 13 wasn't enough.
But then we crashed the replacement also. When we were flying it up at really high altitude, it kind of flew off and lost connection. So we lost 2 drones up there.
Accidents happen everywhere, I guess. Wow. All right, let's take our next question from the Ad Astra Academy. Your microphone's on.
did the scientists make any interesting discoveries about climate change on Mount Everest?
Great
That's a
question.
great question.
They're still working on
We're
it.
still
Yeah.
working on it. Yeah. So basically, we have data coming from five disciplines of science that are studying climate change. It was one of the biggest like comprehensive efforts, bringing different science disciplines together to create this multidisciplinary approach to studying climate change. But a lot of the data is still being worked on, and so even across disciplines, it takes a year to a couple of years to get data and also publish that data. So yes, we are hoping, and like Sam said, the weather station is transmitting data to give people an idea of what the weather.
And one of the tricky things is that it can take a little while to confirm some of the things. So we're not 100% sure, but we think that we may have the highest altitude spider. We found a little spider way up there, and that may be not a fan of spiders. Spiders are pretty cool though, especially when they live up at like 19,000 feet up on a mountain. And then we also found some plants that have never been found quite that high up. And so there were a number of different things that were really cool.
And that brings up a good point. And this is data. This is things that we are seeing currently, and we saw this on the expedition. But essentially, what the biologists are studying is not only the discovery of how high some of these species are, but they're seeing that certain species, flora and fauna, is actually moving up. So as climate is warming, the lower parts of the region, the lower parts of the mountain is sort of warming. Certain species who are used to a certain type of climate or habitat or ecosystem, it's shifting. They're actually moving up. And one of the cases that we sort of learned about was even with yaks. So even with ungulates, larger animals, yaks are actually a cold climate animal. They survive. They have to have a certain temperature to survive. They're very woolly. They have a lot of hair. Fur.
If it's too warm, the yaks can't survive.
They can't survive. And so where yaks used to live, which was actually closer to like 10,000 feet, 11,000 feet, what they're seeing is yaks are moving up. It's too warm for them now. And that's been a change just in the last couple of decades. I mean, which is pretty quick for the scale of climate change.
And even with some of the data not finished yet, I mean, there are definitely visual signs of many big changes going on. That when you speak to people, when you speak to the Sherpas who have lived here for all of time, they were the first people there. When you speak to people who, what it was like 50 years ago, many of the glaciers were larger, so they have actually receded. They have become smaller, and some of them have even melted.
Yeah, base camp, even the Khumbu Glacier, the glacier that base camp is on, has changed over the last couple of decades.
Brilliant. Let's take our next question from the U.S. Virgin Isles. I'm going to unmute your microphone now.
Your question.
Did the thin air and the amount of oxygen make you think differently or feel differently? Feel different?
Yeah, great question. So, one of the reasons that we took 10 days to go from 9,000 feet where we flew in up to 17,500 feet where base camp is, was to let our bodies kind of get used to the thin air and everything. But even with a full 10 days, which is a decent amount of time, it's not sort of a super fast schedule to try to get up there. When I first got to base camp, I know I had a pretty bad headache for the first day. And then luckily the next day I woke up feeling fine. But I think a lot of folks were definitely feeling a little bit of the effects of the altitude. And then one major thing is just feeling more tired. It's a lot harder to walk up any kind of little slope or to go on a hike or something, which, like Tyler was saying, we had to hike around to follow these scientists around. and it's hard. I mean, it's a lot more work. You have to stop and take breaks and really catch your breath and stuff.
And what's really tricky is that I've been coming on and off to Nepal and to this very region lots of times in the last 10 years to work on some of these issues, but you still never get used to it, because the problem is, as soon as you spend time up there, you do acclimatize, you do feel better, so you can actually walk faster, and you do get more acclimatized.
Thankfully.
But as soon as you leave, it takes about a week or two, and then you're down to sea level again. And so even if you just leave for a couple of weeks and then come back, you've already lost it. So it doesn't matter how much time you spend up there. As soon as you go home, that whole effect is gone.
Yeah, in fact, like when we got sick, we got pretty sick, and so you're up at base camp. The quickest way to get down is by helicopter, and so you get on a helicopter, and it takes about an hour to get back down to Kathmandu. And Sam and I took about a week to recover, and we were just at that threshold of being able to fly all the way back up instead of trekking up. So we actually flew back up to base camp, and even
we flew part way, and
then
hung out for 2 days to kind of get used to being higher, but not as high as base camp.
But Martin,
yeah,
Martin was down further. I mean, he was gone longer, so he trekked again. I mean,
exactly. And it's this thing where, as we said before, the worst problem is really recovery. Because if the problem is we got sick 2 times, not just 1 time, but 2 times. So we went down, but I think we went up a little too early. And then since everything's so strenuous up there, you don't have enough oxygen. If you're even a tiny hint of, if you're even a little bit sick, you're never going to recover.
Let's take our next question from Mrs. Nogler's grade 4s. Your microphone's on.
All right, come on up, Chris.
How did you guys go to the washroom without it freezing?
Washroom. Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, at many points during the trek, you're still, I mean, it's very cold, but you can still have an actual functioning washroom that's not frozen over. But once you get above a certain point, the toilets are definitely frozen. And sometimes it's not even a toilet, it's kind of an outhouse. And let's just say it's all frozen over quite quickly.
Yeah.
But it's a tricky situation as well, where you can imagine, again, this whole pressure, so many people coming up there, a lot of people, everyone needs to go to the bathroom. And when you have 60,000 people come here in a year, there's only so many toilets. This is a problem. This, just as we showed you in that waste picture, where you could see the horses eating trash, this other issue of human waste is actually becoming a huge problem. Because lower down the valley, where it's warmer, a lot of fecal matter and urine can actually just go back into nature and somehow dissolve into the ground. But especially up in base camp, you have to take everything down with you.
Yep.
And you have to put a lot of money and effort to actually carry down human shit, because otherwise it's going to be up there. It's going to be in base camp forever.
Yep.
We just got a very funny question from our online audience. They've noticed that all 3 of you have beards. Do all 3 of you always have beards, or did you grow them for Everest?
So we were there in April through June. I was clean shaven when I left on purpose because I wanted to grow it out. So I had purposely cut my beard and then let it grow out while I was there. But I think you guys have had your beard.
Yeah, but you shaved yours.
I did the opposite. I had a beard, went there, my beard got much bigger, because one thing, like with the washroom, taking a shower is sort of a whole ordeal where you're kind of dipping hot water out of a bucket and, washing and then kind of rinsing with like a bucket bath. And so you're not really shaving. I mean, some people definitely shaved, but I didn't shave once while I was there. I don't think. So I had kind of a big beard when I got back. And so I decided it was too much. And so I actually shaved it all off. And then since then, I have regrown a little bit more, trimmed down beard.
And I always have a beard, but I'm from Sweden. I guess that's why.
He lives in Stockholm, so he needs the beard for insulation.
But I will say one thing: when you are climbing, it's actually a very good thing to have at least a little bit of beard when you can, if you're a man, obviously, because freezing your face is a big issue when you're at high altitude. You get a lot of exposure on your face. It's very easy to get frost stuck on your cheeks. I mean, you can actually freeze parts of your skin. So having this beard, this small protective layer, you usually get icicles and you get stuff freezes in your beard, but that's better than actually freezing
to your skin.
Yeah, to your skin. Yeah.
We'll take our next question from our bilingual student group in West Virginia. I'm turning your microphone on now.
What was it like to be on Mount Everest? Were you scared?
Good question.
I mean, there's always, in this environment, none of us actually went to the summit. For the people who do, I guess that's a whole new level of scary, because there's so many challenges when you're way up there that there are people who die on Mount Everest. And if you go up to the summit, there is always a risk that you might be in an accident, and there might be something happens and you could actually die. Luckily, we were working on the lower altitudes, but there are still big risks here.
Yeah.
I mean, I definitely know my family was scared. I've been there many times working in base camp, and I've been through the ice fall, this crazy place, which is very, very dangerous. So yeah, you do feel scared. There are many instances where it's definitely more dangerous than in your everyday life. But you also get used to it. You have to take precautions at all times. Like when we live in base camp, they make sure to put our tents as far as possible from a possible avalanche. So we do have this continuous safety thinking through everything we do. I mean, there were even people on the expedition working only with safety issues.
Yeah.
But yeah, I definitely do get scared when you, as Tyler said before, when you're in your tent, you somehow hear an avalanche go off. You don't know, it might someday go bad.
Yeah, I would say the avalanches were the thing that worried me the most. And you don't think about it all the time, but yeah, at night when you're sleeping in your tent and you hear a big one, that was definitely kind of the most nerve-wracking. And I made the mistake of mentioning that to my family, and then they were very scared. They were really worried. I know my dad was doing a lot of research about avalanches, and probably more than he should have been. But
also with another crazy thing to consider here is that we might be talking about the mountains now, and it's very easy to think about the dangerous fact about the mountains and the avalanches. But again, with this big pressure on this region, with these flights and with these helicopters coming in, that's the only way to get into this place. And with so many flights coming every day in high season at this place, as there's so many people coming, there can literally be almost 100 flights in one day to this tiny little airport in the middle of the mountains. So of course, there's been several big airplane accidents and several helicopter accidents. So the mountains is one thing, but this is a very remote, crazy place in many ways. And even getting on a helicopter or a plane to get there can be very scary.
Yeah, and they have a very select group of helicopter pilots that will fly from that airport that I showed you in Lukla all the way up to base camp, because base camp's at 17,500 feet, which is higher than most helicopters fly at. And so you see they sort of use the same group of helicopter pilots every climbing season. They're sort of like an elite group that are really good at their job.
And then one more note on safety, because we were studying climate change, is that as the area kind of melts in different patterns, and as maybe it stays warmer longer, you get a lot of meltwater collecting in these lakes, and then the lakes can actually drain very quickly in what's called a glacial outburst flood, or the ice can be less stable. And so as climate change affects these areas, they're actually getting a little bit more unpredictable and a little bit more unsafe.
Yeah, and that brings up another safety issue.
Safety is very important.
Yeah. As these glaciers are receding and melting, like Sam said, and then sometimes parts of it freezing again, there's a lot of fluctuation. You'll see parts of the glacier where there's holes the glacier is not solid all the way through. And so a glacier is massive. They're large, very large pieces of ice. But there are some parts of the glacier now that have holes in them. So you don't know, you might be walking across, and if it's not stable, you fall right through. So that may be a new challenge coming up in the future is with recession and melting.
All right.
Thanks for the
Yeah, great question on safety. Let's move to Miss O'Gorman's class. I'm gonna unmute the microphone. Oh, they're excited.
Yes.
Wait, I want to do 2 questions.
Hello.
Hey guys.
Okay, so my question is, are you always ready to discover the unknown?
You gotta be. You have to be.
So I think Martin is the right person to answer this question because he has done some really cool discoveries, especially around caves, which is another big part of Martin's work. And we love, so Tyler and I both work for National Geographic Society, and one of the best parts of our job is getting to partner with people like Martin who do some of the coolest work in the world. So maybe you can talk a little bit about
Thank you. I mean, I'm so happy to be working with these guys and with National Geographic, and to have this job and opportunity to be able to do things like this. With Everest, I think there's 2 ways to it. There are 2 ways to it. With Everest, we know a lot. People have already been to the summit. There's a lot of people go to the summit, but even so, you have to look at these other sides, like what we did this time with actual studying climate change on this extreme region. Because even though there's been thousands and thousands of people up there, there are still unknown things. Like you said, they actually found a new spider up there, which might be the highest altitude spider. So that's definitely the unknown. But I think all of our jobs is basically with National Geographic is about venturing into as much of the unknown as we can to continue to push science, but also to come back with these stories so we can share with you, so we can share with other people, and that we can all just learn about what we still don't know, because there's a lot on this planet that we don't know.
Brilliant. Let's take our next question from Team Inspire. Your mic's on.
How much equipment or clothing did you need to use or wear during your expedition?
Well, media equipment aside, we were sort of limited, I think, to 2 extra large duffels to fit all of our clothing and gear into. And so those were packed with, I guess they were packed with a tent. No, not a tent, a sleeping bag. I think I had 4 different jackets, different snow pants, a few different boots, a bunch of warm socks and underwear and that kind of stuff. I think 3 pairs of gloves that it could be used at different times, a few warm hats. But then the media equipment, that was the real challenge. So I think we had, so basically the way that our storytelling team was set up, Sam and I, our producers here, were filmmakers for National Geographic, and we hired teams like Martin's team, which was a team of 4, right? 4 total. And then we had another component to our team, another 4 people, and then 2 other people helping with storytelling. So the media team alone, I think we must have had 30 to 40 cases of gear. And all of that needs to be trekked up either by porter or on a yak and managed at base camp. And so when Sam showed that image of base camp with all the tents, we had a couple of media tents. Those were just filled with big cases of gear, because not just cameras that we bring up. There's so much more. Obviously, the 13 drones we had,
computers,
we had
batteries,
100 hard drives.
You know,
there's a lot of lenses. There's just a lot of gear that has to be shuffled up there.
Yeah, and I think on the clothing side, I always try to think of it that we actually, when we go to these extreme environments, we kind of, we take inspiration from the animals who live there in how we dress in a way, because I'm very sure that most of us on the expedition, we were wearing a lot of wool. So a lot of wool, probably 4 or 5 layers of wool to keep warm at the core. And then we all have down jackets with, feathers inside them, because all these natural materials come together to actually make sure we walk around in these huge down jackets to stay warm. So we used the best materials are to actually like dress like those animals who are able to live up there.
Awesome. Miss Galetta's class has been very patient. Let's get a question from them.
Great.
Hi, I'm Ray, and I'm here to ask, how do you keep your equipment from freezing?
Oh man, I
Great
wish.
question.
You can't. Almost.
Yeah. So, like we were mentioning, one of the teams that we worked with, it's 4 people from Idaho who are mountain filmmakers, and they make a lot of like ski movies. And the head of their team had actually summited Everest the year before, and he was telling us about how he was using these little Sony cameras, which are really high quality cameras, but they're pretty small. And he was saying that last year his camera was completely encased in ice to where he couldn't change any of the settings. He couldn't change the focus. He couldn't change the shutter speed or the aperture or anything like that.
But you could record.
But it was still recording the whole time. And so he just kind of set the settings and hit record, and it was just encased in a block of ice and was just rolling the whole time. So kudos to Sony for that one.
I think that the cool thing there and about your question is that it's tricky because in many ways, a lot of this equipment, even cameras, it's fine if they freeze. It's fine. The main problem is when they get wet.
Is moisture.
Because if so that's one of the things we have to do when we work up here is once you go to bed at night, you always keep your cameras outside of the tent because it's much better to keep it out there in the freezing temperatures to make sure maybe it freezes over, but at least it hasn't gone wet. Because if we take it into the tent where we are sleeping, there's moisture, it's much warmer, then it would kind of get wet. Maybe you get some sweat on it, or just condensation gets in. And then when you take it out of the tent in the morning, then you get a big problem because that water that maybe have come in will go to ice. So we always kept them outside the tents to make sure they would still keep working, even if they were a block of ice.
Yeah, just to follow up on that, it works. Basically, when you're at base camp during this part of the season, you're basically late spring. And this could be something that's evolving, but you have extreme temperature shifts up at those elevations. So at base camp, yes, it's extremely cold. It gets very cold, but it actually, like clockwork, every day from about 9 a.m. to, 1:30 p.m., it's hot. It's probably 60 degrees with a very harsh sun. And then like clockwork, it just starts to freeze again. And so you have these extreme temperature shifts, and that doesn't work very well for hard drives. And so all of our work is stored on these hard drives. We everything that we're doing, everything that's important is on our hard drives. Every day we're dumping footage and stills. And so we actually lost, I think, half of our hard drives due to that extreme temperature shift, which created condensation. And so very early on in the expedition, we were having so many issues that we had to helicopter our hard drives down to Kathmandu right away so that it wasn't in these extreme environments. And this isn't an equipment issue, but at night when you're sleeping in your tent, like Martin said, condensation can build up. In the morning, you often wake up with, at least I did, with a frozen tent, but then water on my face.
Yeah. Because then it melts and it's dripping on you.
It's just dripping. So your sleeping bag's wet, your face is wet, anything exposed, just everything's wet and cold.
We've got a quick question. Let's go down the line with it. It came from one of our students tuning in online. They're hearing about all these challenges and all this discomfort. Would you go again? Yes or no?
I would.
Yeah, for work, and if it's for an actual cause like this, I think that's when I would definitely go back, because it's an important issue, and whenever there's science to be done in this place, I definitely would. But I would not go back for any kind of personal purpose, because I think, as you've seen in some of these pictures, with the pressure on this region, with the insane amounts of people coming to this very place, I think there's so many more other mountains that I would like to visit personally. But if there's important work, I'm very sure we'd all heed the call.
Yeah, yeah. As far as climbing goes, there are such beautiful mountains that are only a little bit shorter,
Yeah.
and nobody's on them.
Yeah, that's a crazy thing.
So I think if I went back to climb, it would not be to Everest, but it's a beautiful region that has great food, awesome people, amazing culture. Like, it was a really amazing experience. So I would definitely go back.
And also, as you I showed you that picture of the trash with the horses. That's always what I come back to, since I've worked for several years and seeing that flip side of the coin, where one thing is like Sam said, it's beautiful mountains, it's beautiful people, but there's also big trouble in this region with this massive pressure. And if there's a way that I can step away so I'm not part of that pressure, that's a good choice to make.
Awesome. Well, it's Storytellers Month when we're running long, but I do have one last question for you guys. What advice do you have for all of the young explorers with us today?
Keep exploring and start with the stuff in your backyard. It might seem, when you see projects like this, I know, because when I was a kid, I was looking at projects like this, hearing about people working Mount Everest, and I had no idea that you could ever even actually work with this. But if you want to work with exploration or with storytelling or science, whatever field you want to go into, start small and start exploring what you can today, because building all those experiences, either learning to climb, learning to photograph, learning to be a good scientist in whatever field that may be, you got to start small, and sooner or later, bam, you're going to be standing there in a place you would never have imagined.
Yeah, I would second that. That was good.
Yeah. Great answer. But yeah, I would say stay curious, definitely kind of follow your interests and follow, whatever just really kind of grabs your attention, whether it's in school or whether it's outside of school. Just don't be afraid to take a really deep dive into something that interests you, because you never know where it can end up leading you.
And remember that all of us, there were not too many years ago when we were sitting in a classroom.
Yeah.
Had no idea what we were going to do.
Yep.
But keep on studying, as Sam said, become a nerd about something.
Yeah.
Get nerdy on something, hook on to the subjects that you feel passionate about, and just keep on exploring.
Love it. All right. Well, if you and your class want to get involved in the work that this amazing team did on Everest, you can check out the Nat Geo Education Everest activities at natgeoed.org. And you can also always access that live data from the weather station that the team installed. For example, right now up at Camp 2, it is 0 degrees Fahrenheit with 77-mile-an-hour winds. So I am glad I'm not there. Additionally, teachers, Sam, Tyler, and Martin's videos from Everest can be found in many of our resources on the site, including some of our new free professional development courses. You can sign up for those at natgeoed.org/courses. We'd love to stay in touch. Talk to us on Twitter at @NatGeoEducation with #ExplorerClassroom. And of course, we hope you tune into the rest of Storytellers Month and lots more Explorer Classrooms in the future. Here comes the fun part. I'm going to turn on everybody's microphone. Go ahead and scream bye and thank you to Sam, Tyler, and Martin for their time today.
Bye.